Welcome. This is the 26th year of this conference, and I have been here from day one. Our first speaker is going to be Ted Phillips, director of the Center for Physical Trace Research, an engineer, professional photographer, and musician, participant in the Vanguard satellite tracking program, and a field engineer in the Minuteman Missile Project. Okay, so Ted Phillips, and he's going to talk about the artifact in Slovakia.
Thank you. You know, this place is great. I don't know how many years I've been coming here. I haven't been able to make it for the past several years, and I'll be going through a lot of material, and if you've seen any of it before, I apologize. I try to keep all of the images and so on as current as I possibly can. And as far as the artifact, I think you'll find that interesting. And I began research in 1970. Along with Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And after all these years of backtracking the guy that found the artifact, it appears to be absolutely true. And on the last trip over, I did manage to find the cave, which was a quantum leap because it's a very small entrance, and as Dolores said, in the middle of flat nowhere. And it was quite an experience. Let me see if I can make this work. First of all, going back, what I did for the past 49 years is investigate cases where a UFO would land, make ground contact, and was seen generating physical traces, a landing site of some kind. The landing sites varied from different types of objects. It became evident pretty early on that a particular object would leave a particular type of fingerprint. And so I was fast believing, hey, this is for real. And this group, this was one of our first meetings, Dr. Hynek and the Invisible College. And I'm that very handsome dude standing over between Jacques Vallée and Dave Saunders. And it makes me sick that long ago. But that was actually at a meeting in NCAR, and with the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Now, if I could make this advance. Oh, that could make a difference. No. I have to aim it. Okay, all right. Yeah, well, we got that under control. But these are representative of sites that I've investigated. In 1968, Allen Hynek suggested over dinner that I should start specializing in physical trace evidence. No one else was doing it. And so immediately I went back through the historical files, and the first lecture that I gave on this subject was at the first MUFON conference, which was 69 or 70, I don't remember. But I had, at that point, 157 landing cases with physical evidence, and everyone was amazed. They thought, oh my God, that many. And course, I was thinking, well, that's not very many. On the front row, I had Heineck and Valet and Andrus and the Lorenzens. And it was kind of a nervous time. Now, at this point, I have in the files about 5,200 such cases from 95 countries around the world. So the physical evidence is not rare. At the high point in the numbers of cases coming in, we were getting a new landing case with physical evidence every 36 hours. Now, this happens to be one of my very favorite cases. I won't take the time really to go into it because we've got a long way to go. This was in 1954 in Italy, a lady walking through the woods to a cemetery. And this lady had seen one movie in her life, had never heard radio, lived in a tiny isolated village, and she runs into these two little guys by this kind of oddish object. And the thing I always found so curious and fascinating about this case, there were many witnesses outside of this lady. The object was seen going into the forest. It was seen coming out of the forest. The next day, an identical type of object was seen hanging by what looked like a chain from a disc-shaped object, swinging back and forth very near the ground and impacting a tree 2 times, perhaps with these two little guys inside. But the other fascinating thing about this case is the way they're dressed, much less the way they look. And not only this lady, but a number of other witnesses actually got to see the little guys. And what really took me over as I gathered more and more trace cases was the fact that these guys show up in landings in the 1916s, the 1927s, the 1939s, and up through the years. Now, over a period of time like that, one would suppose they would at least change their costumes. Identical type object. And I have so much fun with this because in my twisted mind, the most plausible answer is that perhaps they were all leaving on the same day, going to those different periods of time. But at any rate, we have many tremendous cases. These are sketches made by a newspaper reporter that went in and talked to these people. Now, this is a photo that was sent me by email a couple of weeks ago, and I was really happy to get this. This is Alan Heineck and I investigating a landing case in Florida in 1975. And the thing was covered by CBS News, and it was pretty cool. We were out in the middle of the Ocala National Forest. There was a lot of tree damage and a landing site. And it had been seen, the object, by 3 guys, hunters, and a lady friend. Well, the lady friend turned out to be a problem because as the CBS people were filming live, we hear this noise, commotion coming through the forest. And it was one of the hunter's wives. And she had a large purse, and she was swinging it pretty hard. And CBS caught all of this. I thought it was really incredibly funny. Alan, not so much so. But at any rate, he sent me several of these. Very nice to have. Okay, the Slovakian artifact. This is Antonin T. Hurok and J. Allen Hynek in their first meeting in 1970. I received a call from a good friend in Denver and telling me that, hey, you've got to talk to this Czech guy. And he told me a little bit of the story. I talked to Tony on the phone, and a week later, Ginger and I headed for Hurok's home. And we talked there all day and through the night with he and his wife, Anna. And he related an incredible story. And after talking with him, I was so impressed that we drove on to Las Cruces, where Alan had a second observatory. And we got together, we talked about this at this meeting, and he said immediately, we've got to try to follow through on this. So he started making arrangements with Jim and Coral Lorenzen of the Aerial Phenomena Research Committee, and they brought Jackie Gleason, who was a rather well-known comedian, actor, and musician, on board, and he agreed to fund my first trip over there in 1970. So, as we were gathering ourselves together, at that time, Slovakia, eastern Slovakia, was a very primitive country. And in a lot of instances, it still is today. And Tony had given us, Tony had given me the names of 4 of his friends who were located in Prague, and they would help providing supplies and transportation to get back in this remote area. Well, the Russians had invaded Czechoslovakia in 1968 and had total control of the country. And before we could launch the 1970 expedition, our 4 contacts were arrested by the Russians and killed. So that put that down. It would be 1998 before Joe Fermi would give me the funding to head over there. And at that time, in 1970, this is the only sort of map that we had of the area. The cave entrance, very small, in an exceedingly remote section of the High Tatra Mountains, which border the line with Poland. And so we didn't have a whole lot to go on. Other than Tony had given me the coordinates, latitude and longitude of this thing. And what had happened briefly, in 1939, the Nazis invaded Czechoslovakia, and Tony was arrested, put in a concentration camp called Thymwall up in the Bohemia area. And they took everything he had. They owned lots of land. They were very wealthy and had collected a lot of important artwork and artifacts. All of it was taken down to the wedding ring off of Anna's fingers. And he was placed in the camp in 1939. 1941, he managed to escape, one of the very few people to escape from any of the Nazi concentration camps. He slipped into Slovakia and joined the Slovakian Underground Army. He soon became a captain, and he had a full unit of men at the base of the High Tatra Mountains, October 1944. And they were pinned down in trenches by the Germans. and very heavy snowfall, very deep, dense snow. And the Germans opened up with artillery, and they killed all of the 184 Slavic men, except for Tony, Uric, and Martin, two of his soldiers. And they were left for dead. The next morning, as Tony was awakening, he saw this tall Slavic sheep herder working on Martin's wounds, which were severe. Uric had pretty substantial injuries. And at any rate, he had built a small wooden thing to put Martin on, sled, and pulling Martin and the other two following, they went for 4 hours into the high Tatras. And I've been there, and believe me, it's a pretty rough place. They walked up to a bluff, what they call a scalia, and there was a pile of rocks. Slavic, the sheepman, removed the rocks, and there was a small crevice-like opening. They slid inside into an opening up into a very large room. And Slavic was blessing himself, the other men in the cave, which they found to be a little odd. And he then told Hurok, don't go past this room into the cave. He said, my father and grandfather took me deep into this cave, and it is haunted, and there are poisonous gas and pits and all that. But Tony was thinking that they had not had any food for 4 days. And as soon as Slavic went out and swept away their tracks in the snow and left, moving down into a pine forest area into his home, Hurok is thinking food. So he grabs up his rifle, some rope, his carbide light, which was a military issue, which I have to this day, a very prized possession, and made his way back into this massive cavern. And after about 2 hours, and this man was greatly experienced in underground exploration, because on their property they had owned radium mines and lead mines. And as a matter of fact, he had sold radium to Madame Curie back in the 20s. He had quite a list of good friends. And as he goes deeper into this cavern, he comes to a long, level passageway, almost a circular passageway. And it drops to a short crawl space. He drops down on his knees, hunkers down, and goes through this, and he comes out into another large room. Now, what you see in this image, and this is a direct photograph from his 1944 diary. He was an engineer. He had 4 degrees in engineering, 2 degrees in business, and was a linguist. He could speak 12 languages. Very intelligent man, world travel. And as he looks out from under this crawl space across there, he sees this dark area, kind of oval in a vertical way, at the other end of this room. What he immediately notes is that this material is, he said, jet black like a mirror. No seams, no rivets, just this mirror-like jet black material. And amazingly, all around it, there is a kind of framing of cave formations, stalactites, stalagmites, flowstone. Number one, if you look at that, and I've been exploring caves since I was 14, so that's 120 years. And if you consider that, the fact that they're growing on the face of this thing, it's a few years old, way few years old. He could see coming down the face. If you'll look to the right side of the black material, there's a darker area, a line. And this is some sort of possibly stress crack. Where it comes to the cave floor, it's just barely large enough for a man to wriggle through. And you have had to have known Tony Hurok to understand how he could do this. He had to take his clothes off, and with a carbide light and a torch go into this black area. The floor of this, going through this outer wall, was sloping down at 40 degrees, which is relatively steep. And he gets in there and he's being kind of chopped up by stalagmites and other little four-inch stalactites from the ceiling. And suddenly he starts rolling. And as he's rolling down into the darkness, his carbide light goes out, the torch flies over here, it's extinguished. And luckily he was very familiar with the underground. But he rolled until he slammed into a wall, which was the curved wall at the other side of this thing. Now, this is a good overview. Okay, if you're looking down from the top, the room that he was in is to the right, and the device, shaped like a kind of fat crescent moon, is the artifact. This thing, and he measured it. He was in there every day for a week until they finally had to leave the cave. And he very carefully, as an engineer, took measurements, studied it. It was like a vertical shaft going up 16 degrees off of vertical. And he was never able to determine how far this went up. And he extended torches, he shot his military rifle straight up it, and which had a really bad reverberation effect inside this thing. And but it's 85 feet across, it's 27 feet from the back wall to the front wall, and the front wall is 7 feet thick. So we have to kind of assume that the entire outer wall of this thing has that kind of measurement. This is a side view. The room he was in went under the little overhang, and here was the configuration of the exposed outer wall. Now this gives you, he did these later for Alan and I, and he put in the estimated height of an average man, and showing that this exposed area was like 18 by 23.5 feet in size. Side view that he drew later of the room, and the face exposed, and the interior of the shaft itself. Now you'll notice down at the bottom of the shaft the notation, teeth of cave bear. This is where it gets really interesting. What he was standing on, what he rolled down, was a 6-foot thickness of dripstone. And generally speaking, under conditions similar to this, that would mean about 6,000 years of drippage. He dug down through loose areas in that point, and having gone 6,000 years through drippage, he finds the skeleton of a prehistoric cave bear. He brings out the teeth of the cave bear, 3 of them. And so he can try to identify. He's not sure what kind of animal this is, except it's quite large. The cave bear would be like 20 feet long and weigh several tons. Enormous thing. But even cooler yet, the cave bear is lying on top of a constructed, he said, wavy grill work that went on down below this known area. It went down and it made an angle. And as he's standing there studying this grill work, he thought he could feel warm air and hear a sound. So he put his ear and cheek to the grill. Very definitely warm air coming up out of there. And these caves are quite cold. This one is quite deep. And yet you're having warm air, and he could hear at a great distance below him. This is a guy very acclimated to the underground and the sounds and so on. He could hear what he described as like a large turbine running. October of 1944. And the thing I can tell you without any question is this thing is sitting right now in this cave in eastern Slovakia. Now that shows, that's his original sketch showing the chamber, the outer wall, and so forth. All right, when we found the entrance to the cave on the last trip, which the next speaker generously funded, Larry Sikander, and I'll be forever in his debt on that one. This is a view looking east. Gives you a little bit of an idea of the roughness. View looking south, and it's not a lot warmer south. This is the Hurok Castle. This is where Tony lived when the Nazis came through. And it's a magnificent piece. It sits up high above the uranium caves on top of the mountain. This is the current owner. And when I said Antonian Hurok, he became very excited. And unfortunately, he didn't speak English. And I could not even learn how to say hello in Slavic because it's a mixture of about 50 different languages. Anyway, this is me and one of my Slavic friends getting ready to go into the entrance of the cave. And this is a chamber. This is the entrance chamber. Probably where they stayed. And we did find a sort of calendar which was overcoated by considerable years of crystallization. Remembering this was 1944. And it had marked 7 days, which is the time they were in there. It had a kind of rough drawing of the shaft. And so I have no doubt that this was done by Hurok and his men. This alcove we found, in his diary, he described the deathbed of Martin. They placed Martin in an alcove, and this is the only one that we found like this, and they heated stones and put them under him to try to keep him warm. And it's there that he passed away. And you can just barely see an M, a tall M between the two lights. Martin, we think, directly below his deathbed. The initials JF, that was Jurek, who was a carpenter in Bratislava after the war. And this is me right after the discovery, or standing in my backyard waiting for more funding. But to try to bring you up, I'm going to do a Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio. Anyway, to bring you up to date, I have been negotiating with a couple of guys. Hello, there we are. Unfortunately, I can't tell you the names, but they have been working for the past year on funding. And when they approached me about this, a made-for-television movie, it was going to take money and a lot of it. Because if I go back into these mountains, it'll either be by helicopter or being dragged on chains in an iron lung by mules. You couldn't even get an ATV back to this place. I am not joking. It's something. It was a strong 7-hour climb from where you could get your automobile. The automobile was a rented Skoda, and you didn't take it too deep into the woods. Good little cars. So anyway, currently that's where it's at, and I have some expectations that we will be going back there to finish the job. I should note that even though I was in the cave, I made it back, surveyed it as I went, made it back in about 1,000 feet, and it was so boulder-ridden. The Russians in late 1944 did a lot of aerial bombing, and there are lots of big craters around this. And I think it probably broke some of the ceiling rock out and the side rock. It was very dangerous, and I was basically by myself, and I went as far as I could, and I could see beyond the boulders that it opened up and continued on. And in doing the survey, I knew the direction the cave passage was following. So I started noting as I would go in and out, going back to camp and back up to the cave, if I followed that azimuth that the passage was following, there was a 25-foot, roughly circular area where as soon as you would walk over the edge of that thing, it was just a kind of open field. Anything and everything operating on batteries would die. And so I started playing with it. I started experimenting around. And finally it got to the point I put a tri-field meter out in this area and 3 compasses. And I backed up, put the camera so it would keep running outside this area, zoomed in, and you can see this beautiful 2-second sweep back and forth. There is an EM pulse of some kind, EM frequency, emerging from that area every 2 seconds. And about 4 years ago, a Russian scientist ran onto the same kind of signal in Yugoslavia, 2-second pulses, and started digging back through manuscripts, and he found the description by villagers of a huge cylindrical object, dark object, that came out of the sky making a lot of noise and touched down on the ground. It was a pretty good distance from them. And each day, with all this noise, they would see it getting shorter and shorter until it was gone. They waited several days to be sure it wasn't coming back and went to the area, and there was this large hole going on down into the ground to an unknown depth. So I don't know. That may be grasping at straws, but it's certainly an interesting coincidence. And they've also now, I understand, found one of these things in Romania. So who knows? There may be several. And the purpose would be, that's what's fascinating. Okay, I'm going to jump forward. For 15 years, I've been investigating at the request of the property owners they contacted me. Strange activity, and a lot of it, 15 years. And currently I have on file 1,132 reported events. This is from an area that's about 3.5 by 4 to 4.5 miles in size. Now, before you ask a question, I have no idea why this area. We've looked at everything we could look at, think of, to make it different. Is there something different about the ground, about anything? And we've not been able to uncover anything. And before anyone starts questioning this, this is a replication of a real event. I wish I had photos like that. But 234 witnesses. No. And these are all good people. You would believe them about anything. And over all these years, I've found them to be exceedingly credible. Touch you. Okay. Early on, we start talking about ambers, mainly because that was the color of the object. And I shot this photo. I got a whole series back in 1999 with 35 millimeter camera, and really, really cool photos. And generally, the ambers have been seen with up to 29, 30 witnesses. So it's not just one person making up a story. I have found witnesses going back to the 30s, 1937 is the earliest, having seen these things and telling me that in the 1940s they would gather on a specific farm and watch this stuff going on. So kind of eliminates flares and a lot of other things. And these same devices have been seen sitting on the ground. And pretty good size. They're about 10 feet high, about 8 feet wide. And now this is a sequence of photos of the ambers. This one, if I can stop it, there we go, is kind of significant because you can see it's a fairly long time exposure. And the star trails indicating the rotation of the Earth, how this object was stationary. It's not elongated, it's not distorted. And they have been seen stationary for up to 25, 30 minutes. Those are stars up above the amber. They appear bright, and the entire area appears to be this orange-yellow glow. They're self-luminous. They do not project light. They'll not cast shadows on anything. And they're sometimes extremely bright, and yet they're soft to the eyes. Very difficult to describe what you're looking at. Now, these are simulations to indicate the different types of patterns that the ambers have been seen in. Now, this is one of two of the very best photographs that we have of an amber. We have a lot of video of this particular event. It was in May of 2008, and there were 8 of these things seen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. And this is amber 1. And the interesting thing is, when you get a reasonably close, reasonably clear photo. You the banding of light beyond the amber color, which shows up as a very white light. That's amber 2 of that grouping. And again, you can see the reddish band. And some of these have actually been shot in New Mexico, all showing this same kind of banding. Now, one of my very favorite things in the whole world are light bulbs. And I say light bulbs so you don't get that confused with orbs, which very typically are dust specks, bugs, etc., etc. Light bulbs, on the other side of that, are self-luminous. They do not produce shadows, do not produce a beam. They're silent. And they range in size from a couple of inches in diameter to 10 feet. The 10-foot jobs are pretty impressive, but they're pretty rare. And generally, when those are seen, they're moving along the ground and then go airborne. This particular image is a still frame from a video of fabulous, the best I've ever seen of light bulbs video, shot by a family of 4. Lady, her husband, their 20-year-old and 12-year-old sons. And they drive into the cemetery a week before Halloween, thinking they're going to scare the hell out of their kids. On the video, which is shot, it covers this entire thing. You can hear the family talking, and it's worth it just to listen if you didn't have any video, because the parents were much more afraid than the 2 sons. And they're standing there, and the car lights are on, they're making all kinds of racket, and this thing flies in. And it's about 60 feet away, and it has a very bright surface, no detail. And it flies around, it goes vertical, it drops down, it comes over, it does this, it goes through all kinds of flight patterns. Finally flies off to the other side. Well, they're pretty excited by this point. However, 2 more come flying in. Look at the color in those. You can see it even though the video is fair quality. It's not high def. And this is a still frame. But they're constantly, I've looked at these frame by frame through this whole video. And there seems to be a cloud-like extension out from the center. The light source seems to be at the center of these balls. And this cloud-like material is constantly changing shape and color. It's very active. It's really ongoing. And it's the first time I've been able really to observe that kind of detail. And they will maintain close proximity. They'll separate more than you see here, but there'll be kind of a veil connecting the two. The video is fascinating to watch. This is another frame. And if you'd like to see the video, this is a good time for a Tony Orlando plug. I just last week finished a DVD on the Marley Woods, finally. And this entire video, it's an hour of video of these things. And this video is there, and believe me, you'll love the audio. Now, before I get away from that, I want to finish it. As they're watching these, they move around for quite some time. Then they move over past the cemetery and stop and become stationary by a large cedar tree. And you can hear him talking about this. He's telling his wife, well, it looks like a gown. And they're going through all this. And the entire video is over 15 minutes. And the really cool part of it is that the 12-year-old, the smartest one of the four, is taking his cell phone and taking still images. And there is a metal building with a very heavy wooden park bench inside it for the visitors to the cemetery, I guess, or maybe people come out of it. Anyway, I'm beginning to believe that. But anyway, they as the parents are kind of underneath this structure, this metal structure, the two boys are outside, and in one of the photographs you can see wavy red and blue lines coming up from the picnic table to the inside of the building. And it's the only time in all the shots that you can see these. And as I talked to them, it turns out that was the point where the parents are saying, "What's that noise?" And you can hear it on the video, on the audio, a kind of scraping, bumping sound. And when I went back in there with them in daylight, we went everywhere. We couldn't find anything that would make this noise. And until the father and I scooted this park bench, and it would take a lot of force. And it's interesting, these light beams were going at the time that happened. And the 12-year-old shooting pictures outside catches this red light bulb, the most intense red I've ever seen, coming in, and it stops just off the corner, about 3 feet off the corner of this building. And amazing shots. And the kid was trying to make copies and deleted them. But that's the way it goes. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, one of the property owners was out walking around checking the cattle and so on. And every time I saw him, I would say, be sure and put your camera in your pocket, because a lot happens on his ranch. And so he had a little Nikon Cool Pics, Fine Pics, something. And he sees this light bulb, obviously the other side of this tree, and he takes a photo. And then he takes a second photo. Now, beneath it, you can see the fence posts on the barbed wire fence, that this thing is kind of moving above and coming up. It's coming towards it. The next photo. The next. The next. And that's the last one. And the interesting thing about this is, I said, well, how then, if it was this close, did it disappear? And he got this look on his face, and he said, I don't remember. So make of that what you will. But at any rate, this is a very good example of what you're going to see with the light bulbs. And he said this thing at the close point did appear to be about this diameter of a couple of baseballs. So I wish we had a lot more in series like that. Now this is two light bulbs that Pat and I saw. Again, in the cemetery. It was outside of the cemetery. And we watched as the first light bulb is coming in, and it's moving erratically. And I watched it, and I thought, I'm not going to say I'm seeing anything. And finally she says, are you seeing? I said, yeah, that light. Anyway, it comes on in, and it moves over about 120 feet from us, and very near the ground. So I start taking HD video. Got 33 minutes of video of this thing, and the second one, and a third, and a fourth. And this particular image was shot with another video camera through night vision. These things were not very bright. and they were a green with a tinge of blue. The first two, through the night vision, you could see the ground beneath them quite clearly, twigs, leaves. And the first one was maybe a foot above the ground surface, not moving. And as I watched, and actually it is somewhat visible on video, out of the first one is like the birthing of a second. It comes out, there's kind of a long bit of light that holds them together. It pops loose, and you've got two little greenish blue eggs side by side right above the ground. And 12 feet to the west, two more pop on, and they're actually on the ground. And this went on for over 33 minutes. So, the place is a living laboratory, and I've been so fortunate. With the Center for Physical Trace Research, I was looking at, as always, going in after the ascent of an object, and you're looking at the leftovers, which are good, but you're always chasing footprints, fingerprints. And while I'm on that, I did a lot of compression formulation on the imprints. And typically, a landed UFO of what I call the type 2 and 3 would weigh 14 tons. So this is physical, it's real, without any question. I've done small footprints in the occupant cases, which make up 20% of these 5,200 cases. And the little footprint indicated a figure which was described as 3.5 feet tall, thin, spindly body, weighing 60 pounds, which fits what they were describing. So anyway, and this is one of 47 such rings that have been found in the Marley Woods. Typically 10 feet in diameter, typically with the central area undisturbed. Dehydration, the appearance of microwave type effects, which in growing numbers I have found with the trace cases. Now this is a little different. This is over on Site 3, and Rodney Dillard and I were over there investigating, and the owner said, "Hey, I've found kind of an odd place over there. You might want to take a look at it." Well, we looked at this thing, and it was probably a week or two old, and dehydration, nice oval. Where the line indicates, we found a 2-foot circular area, very distinct, of pretty high radioactivity. Nowhere else in the site, nowhere around. And that's pretty rare, because in the 5,000 physical trace cases, way less than 1% produce radioactivity. So that's kind of interesting. The light mass. This is a very peculiar thing. That's the caretaker's trailer that it's behind. And this thing is sitting on a very high hill, and we later established it's backed by very dense trees. And I've seen this several times, and it's been seen, I think it's 14 times now. And each time it's visible for about an hour and 30, 35 minutes. And this thing gets so tremendously bright. It's an eighth of a mile away, which we established through daylight photography, azimuth, and so on. And at a distance of 0.8 of a mile, it flared up and totally blew out the light monitoring system on the video recorder from almost a mile away. And it remains stationary. It's always at the same point. If I can find the spot here, suddenly. There we go. That's at one of its bright points, and it actually gets brighter than that. Now, these are all still frames from a video. And the next one is my wife's favorite. She said, well, that looks like a doorway. But we tried with all that time. Tom Ferrerio and I, after shooting 40 minutes of video, left the camera running and left the property owner there with it, hopped in the truck, and headed in that direction to try to get closer. And unfortunately, there are no roads, not even little trails back in this area. But we finally drive in, and the owner calls us on his cell phone, and he said, hey, I see you guys. You're about 400 feet to the west of this, and it's starting to move toward you. And so we jump out of the truck. We're headed toward it. It stops, goes back to its original position, and we could not find it. As bright as this is, we could not find it. And I was very disappointed because I wanted to see Tom go in that thing. Of course, I would have followed him if he came back out. This is an image that I took with a 35 millimeter camera telephoto lens of my first sighting of this thing in 1999. And you can see there is a thin line of trees between its location and where we're at, an 8/10 of a mile away. But the cool stuff, look at all the little lighted oval lights. And to me, this thing looks sort of like a beehive, but it is a domed, illuminated something behind the primary light source. And I was never a big fan of the portal cases, but I wouldn't be surprised to see something come out of this. And there's another one on the same property that's just like it. And there have been an amazing number of cattle mutilations right in that area. Now this is a still frame showing the position of the light relative to the trailer. Daylight photo, and you can see the little white dot up there. Imposing each of the images on top of each other, you can determine pretty well where this thing was sitting. Fascinating, and I can't wait until it pops again because I have new cameras. Okay, here we start getting into the stranger stuff. Fences torn down, 166 head of cattle get really crazy. One afternoon, the rancher is standing in an upper field watching the herd of 166. And in daylight, the herd slowly comes together into a very tight group. And he said it appeared that by something he couldn't see, they were forced or pushed into the corner of the field, right up against the fence. And they were held there for 45 minutes. After that point, he could do nothing with these typically very gentle cattle. Almost every night, they would bust out and tear down steel gates. And they just grew totally impossible to handle. And he had to sell the entire herd. They were that badly affected by whatever in the world was going on. It's another section of the fence. Now, one thing I've found over the years, I had 6-7 hour conversation with Bob Bigelow, and we, at his request, sat down and visited quietly for all that time and exchanged a lot of information because of the info on Skinwalker Ranch. And what I have observed at Marley is if a new type of event occurs at Skinwalker, it almost surely will eventually appear in the Marley Woods. So it's kind of a baseline where you're kind of prepared. Not too prepared for this event. The rancher had a very expensive, well-trained favorite horse, and he would try to ride this horse every day. And one morning he drives out. This is a totally locked out ranch, and the people around it are relatives, and if a vehicle that they don't recognize comes in, you're in big trouble. And so the chances of someone sneaking in would be quite rare. It has happened, but they were escorted out by the sheriff. But at any rate, he stops at the corral, tubular steel corral, where the horse is located. Gets out, talks to the horse, whatever you say to them, and dogs I can talk to. But anyway, horse is fine. Gets in the pickup, drives down to another section of the ranch. 15 minutes later, he's back at the corral, and the horse is gone. And a section of the corral is broken outward. And he calls the horse, which typically would come right to him. And he notices the old barn. Now, this took place in 2005. The barn was in a lot better shape than this. But we didn't learn of it till this point. And he just didn't want to talk about it. And I just caught him in the right mood. But at any rate, he notices the big wooden doors on the barn were askew, bent over. And he walks up and he walks in the barn. And he finds the horse as horse meat and blood spread all the way around the walls, the roof, the floor. And nothing really recognizable. And he said, Ted, it looked like the horse exploded. Now, you tell me how something gets in there in 15 minutes and does that. But as soon as we found out about it, we went in. This is Adam Johnson, Tom Ferrario. We tried to get any kind of samples that might give us any kind of information. And it was not to be. This particular rancher typically holds on to this stuff. He has to digest it. So a lot of times I don't get it the morning after. And then sometimes I get it while he's standing there. And it happens. Now, this is the weird. Now we're getting very close. My interest in paranormal activity has increased tremendously in the last 2 years. I had a call from Stan Friedman last week, and I was amazed that Stan would be saying, you know, Ted, I just wanted to tell you I'm really pleased that you're starting to look into the paranormal side of this stuff. And I've known Stanton for 40 years, and I could have dropped the phone when he said that. But at any rate, this is getting more into that, and I am tremendously interested in it. I've started investigating it and have had the aid of some folks that have been in the business a long time. And I have a couple of cases coming up that you're going to want to hear about, believe me. Pretty startling. Okay, this event, Rodney Dillard and I are over there, and where this oval area was found in the radioactivity, there had been a lot of landing sites. So Douglas Trumbull, who is a director of movies and special effects guy. He did 2001 and these really big movies, and is very interested in this stuff. He told me not to say it, but I know you guys won't tell anybody. But anyway, he donated a $3,000 remote game camera, if you can say that about a $3,000 camera. And with this thing, you can set it up, you can turn it on, you can leave it, and you can go a half mile away to your office building or whatever, turn on your laptop, and get images from it. This was one of the very first that they came out with. So, Rodney and I put the camera up in this deer stand, and that's it. And I mean, I tightened everything to the breaking point. And I had the thing cable down, everything where it could not move. And I tried to aim it directly at the area where the oval sight was at. The thing is very difficult because you don't have a viewer or anything. And obviously I didn't get it aimed well. We get back over to the office building. And I turn the laptop on, and the thing has already taken 3 photos. And I thought, oh boy, unless we got a cow that flew by. But this, let's see, I think it's, yeah. This is the original position I left the camera in. And obviously it was off a little bit. And picture 2. Great. The picture. Some things happened to the picture between that one and this one. It starts moving, and image 3 is just a blur where the camera is physically moving while the picture's being taken. And the last shot that it sent me is exactly where I wanted the camera to be. That's another one of those make of it what you will. But I found it pretty interesting, and we went back and we double-checked everything, went up very carefully. And how it could have happened, I don't know, but it was totally locked down. Okay, if we didn't have enough stuff, the rancher at Site 3 one morning looks down into this field, and he sees a white animal. This guy's a hunter. He's hunted bear, he's hunted walruses, pygmies, you name it. And he knows the animal family of all kinds. And he said this thing had to weigh 400 pounds. And I thought, boy, he's gone over the edge on this one. But it was walking along on 4 legs. It had exceedingly long, white, pure white hair. And the hair would shift. It was that long as it took steps. So he pulls out a 30-06. If any of you have shot guns, it's a pretty significant gun. And through the telescopic sight, he shoots it in the flank. And he said, I made it red, meaning he saw blood. It didn't react to the shot. It didn't react to an impact. It just kept walking. And it went on into the woods where, of course, it disappeared. Well, he immediately goes down to the spot, no blood on the ground, not a drop. The next morning, his daughter, who has an adjacent ranch, sees the thing herself from about 600 feet, and there was no blood, no wound, and it was walking normally. And she again said over 400 pounds in size. Now, this is a photo of the critter, just about in the middle, right over the fence post, up at the edge of the rush. And this was taken by this property owner's son-in-law and daughter. It was about 800 feet away, again, estimating hundreds of pounds in weight. They got 2 photos. Now, this is a blow-up. This is a blow-up of it. And the second photograph, it had laid down, and it only shows its back and its butt, sort of. A little larger. And the interesting thing to me about this thing is you're getting some light blow out at the end of the head, but the neck and the head seem to be way too small for the body. And the thing had no tail. And again, the long flowing white hair. I have found tons of this hair in different places. Pretty significant stuff. The most interesting to me was this piece here, 16 inches long. And there was a lot of it on the 4th barbed wire line on the barbed wire fence. 16 inches, that's pretty extensive. And then we were fortunate enough to find some of the tracks of something. There's a whole line of tracks, and they were quite large. And they were going into the ground with some weight. Now, this one, you can see some of the claw marks, claw holes. I think the next one, yeah, there you are. The claws are absolutely massive. They measure very nearly a half an inch in diameter, which is a lot of claw. And the cool thing about it was the property owner was up at one end of this line, long line of tracks. I was at the other. And I said, "What do you see when you're looking at this?" He said, "Well, it looks like the thing was on 2 feet with the track patterns." And that's exactly what I was getting. The state, Missouri. Yeah. Now, don't tell anyone, okay? Anyway, before I run out of photos of our findings on this animal, I'll tell you what they are. There have been numerous sightings by various people, all very, very, except one guy, very credible people. And as an example, a guy is driving to work at a radio station one morning, and just after sunrise, and he said, the biggest white hairy dog he'd ever seen in a field. And he stops the car, he gets out, he walks over to the edge of the field, and it stood up. And he said, "I want to tell you, man, that thing looked like a polar bear." He said it had to weigh 4 or 5, maybe 600 pounds. And we've had a number of sightings of it walking upright. And some very good friends of mine, a family, saw it one night right in front of their car. And in one leap, it went from the center of the road, over one lane of the road, over the ditch, over the embankment, and over a fence. So anyway, we get the hair, we get the tracks, we make the plaster cast. The plaster cast shows the depth, 1.5 inches into the ground. Pretty hefty dude, whatever it was. And this was very close to a water source, which is where we've typically found the tracks. So, a good friend of mine, who is a leading on this planet microbiologist at a very huge laboratory, not behind a barber shop or something. they did a microscopic comparison of the hair with all of the known types of critters. And I did this one through the microscope. The unknown is quite different from the dog. And I have a Great Pyrenees Old English sheepdog, and I actually drug her out into the mud. She hates to get wet. And made her make me a track, which I put alongside the cast. It's tiny, and this is a 150-pound dog. And but she donated that piece of hair. The laboratory made, in part, these comparisons. And as it turns out, microscopically, there is no known match to this hair. DNA-wise, no match. That's where it's at right now. And the entire lab got so interested in this stuff that all of the scientists were working on it. And they sent me quite an extensive report. And fortunately, I have that lab for future reference. So that's where we're at. The latest sighting of the big white guy was 2 months ago in daylight. Now, at Site 3, across the pond, these rather unusual tracks, this was a case where the owner called me while he found them and was standing there. And I told him, I said, well, how big are these? Well, I don't know. I don't have anything to measure. I said, do you have your cigarettes with you? He said, yeah. So he gives me this size comparison. And some of those had melted, sort of. And he actually found at the edge of the pond, at the end of the tracks, he said, the butt marks of this thing as it slid down the slope off the pond. So, looks like, yeah, there's an old friend, Ed Marley, and another old friend, Tom Ferrario, who's a team member. And is it time? We're through? 3 minutes? Okay. All right, I might be able to get into this real quick. A couple of weeks ago, a family, good friend of mine, of Rodney and I, were camped in this area. Actually, it's on Rodney's old farm, which, by the way, is a very haunted house. And I picked up my first EVPs in this house. But at any rate, they're camped out. I hope you can read that, down at this little campsite. And they had found tracks, very unusual tracks. And as I say, we know these people, and they are credible to the nth degree. Guy, his wife, and their son. And when they were at the campsite, they looked across about 350 feet away, and they saw this large, black, woolly, Bigfootish looking thing. And this is the first track that they found. And when Rodney and I got up there, we found some more. They were a little degraded, but there were several up through there. Didn't see Bigfoot. This is the old haunted house. A lot of you guys would love this. The old Dillard homestead, man, and it's got some stuff in it. Oh, and this is a photo. I get this in at the end. This was taken by, again, a good friend. And she is a nurse in a hospital out east. And this figure had been seen numerous times. And when it would come out of a room within 24 hours, that person would be deceased. And she had her cell phone with her. And the gals started screaming. A whole herd of nurses saw this. It was coming out of the doorway, and she snapped a photo of it. I know, you think fact or fiction, but I really know these people. And so there it is. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, I guess I'm going to have to wind it up. As usual, there's always a lot more, but just know I have been asked to co-author a book with Adrian Lee, who is a paranormal researcher, a book on the connections, possibly, of the paranormal and UFO sightings. Thank you very much. Thanks.